Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be doing a tiny teach for the ACT SAT test strategies workshop before we go into more of a conversation. But before then, I just wanted to welcome everyone in today's session. And as a friendly reminder, please know that this workshop is being recorded and it will be archived online for students to access. Really quickly, my name is Denise Ovet and I work with the TGR Foundation. I'll just be your moderator today. But before we go into and talk to our guest speaker, I wanted to just go over some digital community guidelines. For example, if available, we encourage our students to turn on their video feature. It's going to make a more personal experience. If you have any questions throughout our conversation later on, please make sure you use the raise hand feature to indicate that you have any questions or perhaps any comments that you'd like to share. And then again, I know the chat box is very popular, so make sure you comment any questions that you might have or any thoughts and any wonderings. And again, we definitely want to make sure we have a respectful and just collaborative environment among each other. So without further ado, I do want to introduce our guest speaker. Her name is Lauren Leon. It's been a privilege to work with her all of these years, and she's a wealth of information when it comes to test prep. She has her own company, Excel College Prep, and she's just really excited to help our students today and just give them some tips and just overall knowledge and basic information regarding the ACT and the SAT. With that said, and before Lauren gets started, there is one thing that I do just want to put out there, and I know that students everywhere are really wondering, should or should I not take the SAT or the ACT? I do want to say that there are a lot of colleges throughout the country that are now test optional. With that said, that still creates a lot of questions among students. Yes, I understand that some schools are test optional, but should or should I not take it? I think that really depends. I think a lot of these situations are one-on-one, case by case. And it's something that you really need to think through, in looking at your college list. What colleges are you applying to? Which ones may still require it perhaps, so that's something that you will want to look into, and even have a conversation with your family. And I know that we work with a lot of students that maybe are the first in their families to go off to college, and it might just feel uneasy, my family doesn't really know how to go about it. I would really reach out to a school counselor, or even perhaps you guys can reach out to us and let's have a one-on-one conversation and see what might be the best fit for you. Given that I know a lot of students are also applying to state schools, and I know some state schools may require the SAT, but again, it's on a case-by-case basis. I would say there's really no perfect answer right now. So we just wanted to address that right from the beginning before I hand it over to Lauren. So Lauren, thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, we're gonna get right to it. I know you kind of wanted to talk about maybe some similarities and differences between the ACT and the SAT. So I'm gonna hand it over to you.
All right, well, thank you. I'm glad to be here, and I miss seeing you guys in person, obviously, but, happy to help in any sort of way I can. So let's just get into the SAT and the ACT. The SAT is definitely, I feel like, the more popular of the two tests. You guys may have a little bit better idea of that test. It is scored out of 1,600 total. 800, as you can see here, 800 in the reading and writing and language section. Those two are put together to make a score out of 800. And then the other half of the test is math. So generally, students that prefer math and that really like math do like the SAT because you kind of get the reading and writing done in the beginning, and then the whole second half of the test is math, which is kind of nice. And it's half your score. Whereas the ACT, if you haven't taken it or are not as familiar, it is 4 sections still, but each section is scored out of 36. And then the 4 sections are averaged to give you your overall or your composite score. So the math is not as big of a component on the ACT as it is on the SAT. So some of my students that really like reading and are kind of quick readers definitely prefer the ACT because they do not have to do as much math. So that's just kind of like the quick differences between them. Make sure on both tests to answer every question. You know, if you don't get to it at the end of the section, if you run out of time, just bubble one letter. Okay, instead of making like a Christmas tree or doing some crazy sort of stuff, just bubble one letter all the way down. It does not have to be C. That is not necessarily the best answer. The SAT and ACT know you guys, like a lot of people are guessing at the end. So it's not, there. Sometimes they do not put a lot of C's at the end. So whatever letter you're feeling that day, or maybe you look and see on your bubble sheet, you don't have a lot of a certain letter, you know, recently, then go with that. But just one letter all the way down, B, 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 or A. That is the correct guessing strategy. Let's go into the more specifics. Denise will move our slides along. Thank you.
Lauren, where were you when I was taking my SAT test?
Like Christmas tree, did you try to make zigzags with your bubble?
I think back in the day they would tell us, and when I say they, like among the students, like, oh, just put C.
Yeah, I mean the SAT and ACT, they know that like a lot of people are guessing, especially at the end of the section. Like if you're guessing in the middle, knock yourself out, put C. But if you're guessing on the end, like especially like the end of the math, I swear they just don't put that many C's because they like know that's where the harder ones are and everyone's guessing. And so they like stack it full of like A's and E's and like all of, you know, more random stuff. So anyway.
All right. Well, here's this slide. If you want to maybe start with the ACT, because I know you'll probably focus more on the SAT.
Yeah, sure.
You want to do that?
Yeah, sure. We'll start with the ACT first. As I said, it's 4 sections scored out of 36. You get an average of the 4 scores. So once again, if you're not as strong with math and you're better with English and reading, this may help you because the math is only a 1/4 of the score instead of being half of the score. The English is first. That test, it's basically like editing passages. So kind of definitely test your grammar. You need to know your semicolons and colons and apostrophes and comma rules, which we can always go over in a later session, a little more specific. The math on the ACT has a lot of geometry, like a lot. Definitely some trig also and pre-calculus. So it definitely gets harder as it goes through the section. So the end of the section is kind of nasty. So do not go rushing through the beginning. Don't go plowing through the easier questions just to get to the end where, you know, it's challenging. So make sure you get the easier ones. That formulas are not given, must be memorized. That's very, very important because the SAT gives you a formula box with all the, you know, area of a circle and all that jazz. ACT gives you nothing. So you've got to memorize your formulas. And I think we will include that slide later. But basically all the just basic area and volume formulas, distance formula, slope stuff, quadratic formula, those things need to be memorized, please. Then the reading and the science are the second half of the test, which is basically an hour and 10 minutes if you put them together of reading. The science section is not really science. It's really more like reading science passages and a lot of graphs and charts and then answering questions about them. So you don't really have to know a lot of science beforehand. If you're worried like, oh, I don't remember science from bio or chem or whatever, it does not matter. You just have to be able to read the science passages and answer questions. So definitely give it a try. The reading and the science are quick. You can even see there 35 minutes on the reading for 40 questions. It's definitely fast. So you've kind of got to be, you know, you kind of got to be on it and moving through it and try to stay focused, which is sometimes challenging when the passages are not super, super interesting, but you guys can do it. The ACT website has some great material on there. They definitely have lots of practice questions and they also have a full practice test. So if you go on the ACT website and go under practice, you can kind of find that if you want to look at it and see what the science is like. But definitely don't be scared off by like science. It's really, they should call it like reading graphs and charts. And then the essay is at the end, it's optional. Most colleges don't really require it. There are some, so that's another thing that like you would look into for your individual schools. The state schools usually do not require it. It's an opinion essay. It's usually kind of a cheesy topic, like should you be able to play with kids' toys, or like should we have more healthy food options at school? So it's something that you should be able to relate to pretty easily and write about and give specific examples about, but it's not something that I would be super worried about. And it does not affect the overall score. It sits as a totally separate score. So definitely not something to stress about. I know a lot of people are like, oh, I don't like to write, or don't worry about it. Might not have to do it. And if you do, it doesn't go into your overall score. That's the same thing on the SAT. The SAT essay, same thing, sits totally separately. It is quite a bit of a different essay, as you can see over there. If you look at the SAT essay, it's 10 minutes longer, and it's a whole different thing. You're given a longer passage that you're supposed to analyze for the author's rhetorical devices. So ethos, pathos, or pathos, and logos, which are how the author builds his credibility, how he makes you, the audience, you know, the reader actually care, and then the logos is the logic or the statistics. And so those things need to be mentioned in your body paragraph. So a little bit trickier to write, but some of you guys do this a little bit more in school, I feel like. So, you know, not horrible. And once again, optional, sits as a separate score. So do not freak out. As you look at the essay, you can see the reading is first, and or as you look at the SAT, the reading is first. It is 65 minutes, so that's a long reading section, way longer than the, you know, the ACT if we're comparing. So maybe if you do read a little bit slower, this may be, you know, more beneficial for you. One really important thing to know with the reading on the SAT is that the questions come in order of the passage. So if you don't want to read the whole passage first, like I usually do not because it's too boring, I look at the questions, maybe the first couple of questions are like lines 10 or like lines 20, great, I'll just read the first 2 paragraphs. So instead of reading 2 columns of information, I just have to read a couple paragraphs and then I can stop and answer those questions. So it's way better personally for me, and I know a lot of students like to do this because they stay more focused on the questions that are being asked, instead of like reading the whole passage, not remembering much, and then having to reread it anyway. But if you want to read it first and you like it and you can stay focused, do it. You know, you've got to do what works for you. It's just an important thing to know that the questions come in order. If there is a main idea question at the beginning, skip it and come back to it, right? Once you've done all the rest of the questions, it should make way more sense anyway. You should have a much better feel for what the passage is about. So that would be my advice on the reading. There is also usually one passage from like the 1800s. Sometimes it is the compare and contrast, like where there's 2 passages. I would save that for last. It is usually the most challenging passage, just because like in the 18 or early 1900s, they wrote a lot better than we do now. So we have all this fancy diction and like sentence structure that we have to read like 5 times to understand. So I would highly advise you to save that passage and do the passages that you're more comfortable with or that you understand better. So that's just a few reading basics. The writing and language is very similar to the English on the ACT. They're actually almost identical, where you're reading a passage and editing it. You need to know your grammar rules, semicolons once again, colons, and all that good stuff. But you do need to kind of read it as you go. It's pretty time generous, not too bad. 35 minutes for, you know, 4 passages is definitely not horrible. Doesn't get harder as it goes or anything like that. There's no like order of difficulty like there is on the math. So the math goes easy to hard through the multiple choice, which is really important to know, you guys, because if you're working on the first few questions in the section, they should be kind of easy, right? So don't overthink them. But as you get through the section to the end of the multiple choice, if you read it and you're like, oh, that's easy, you know, it's A. then you probably need to rethink that and maybe cross off A and look back at it. There's usually some sort of trick. That's why people say the SAT is tricky. So it's just something that's important to be aware of if you're doing an easy question or a harder question. The grid-ins or the fill in the blanks that are in both sections of the math do start over easy. So, you know, I know like some of you guys kind of freak out with the grid-ins because like there's no answers, and just keep in mind that the first couple of the grid-ins or fill in the blanks are supposed to be easy questions. So I would make sure to at least attempt those. Try not to spend too much time on the end of the multiple choice, because that is usually where the hardest questions lie. So make sure you kind of attack the sections thinking about your timing, especially the no calculator section. That one people do tend to run tight on time because it is only 25 minutes for the 20 questions. The other section, the section with the calculator, is much more time generous. You can see 55 minutes for 38 questions. So you don't have to worry about that one as much. But still pay attention, right? The end of the multiple choice is going to be challenging, maybe from like 24 to 30. And then once you get to the grid-ins, they will restart easy again. So you've got to make sure you at least get to them and do those first, you know, grid-ins. The SAT math is way more algebra. There's hardly any geometry. So if geometry is your jam, then go back and look at the ACT. But if you like algebra, SAT is definitely for you. It's a lot of systems of equations. It's a lot of factoring and FOIL. Tons of slope stuff. I mean, the slope is like probably the biggest thing on there, like y equals mx plus b. If I had to tell you like one thing, that is the thing. So also I would make sure you know like mean, median, and mode. That shows up quite a bit. But that's kind of the, you know, the basics with SAT math. I will mention one other thing. They use the word constants quite a bit. They say A and B are constants. That is just their fancy way to say A and B are numbers. So do not freak out if you see a question that asks about constants or that says that, you know, the A and B are constants. Do not freak out. Just try to solve. They're just numbers. They just kind of like to use that wording to kind of mess you guys up. So anyway, hopefully that will be helpful as you're kind of attacking the SAT math section. Denise, do you have any other things that you think I should mention with this particular page before we move on?
Actually, we do have some, like maybe 2 common questions that we get from students.
Okay,
I don't know if there's anything else that you may want to highlight. Otherwise, we can move on to these 2 questions.
No, let's go through the 2 questions, because that was kind of like all the super quick, at least basics on the 2 tests.
Yes, so one of the biggest questions, obviously, you just gave a lot of awesome test strategies for students to consider as they take either of the tests if they decide to take it. But what are some other things that they can do to prepare before they actually take the test?
So as far as preparation, like the best thing that you can do is practice. And the best way to practice is through the actual material that's designed by the College Board and then the ACT respectively. So I believe we will include links to the College Board website. We have that link, right? Mm-hmm. To the 8 tests. So the College Board has 8 actual SATs on their website, and that is just the best way. Sit down, go through, time yourself, or set like a running timer so you're not stressing too much on the timing, but work through the questions, practice, get used to reading, especially like the math. Like the math on the SAT is not that hard. It's just worded kind of funny. So you've just got to get used to how they word the questions and what they're asking for. So I would, the absolute best way, you guys, is just to do practice. I mean, instead of just reading a book about like basic strategies and stuff, I mean, this is good for basic strategies, but I would absolutely like get online, get one of those tests and start going through it and actually just doing some material and try to employ some of the strategies that I talked about, today. And with the math, also remember one other big thing is use your answers, plug in your answers. If you're not sure how to do the algebra, sometimes you can plug in your answers, and that's an effective strategy as well. But practice makes perfect. Honestly, that's the way you got to go. So don't go reading through strategy books and wasting and doing the practice and then checking your answers and seeing what you missed and then do it again. It's that repetition that's really important.
And then last but not least, before we go into kind of like our little community circle of questions with students, in addition to like College Board, are there any additional resources you would recommend, or maybe some questions that maybe students should focus more on, like focus more on learning these certain type of strategies before you take it?
I mean, the only other thing I would say would be like Khan Academy is good. SAT especially has the Khan Academy linked to their website. So if you're struggling with a particular type of question, you can work on that on Khan Academy. It's especially good for the math, because if you're struggling with like function questions, then you can work on those particular questions on Khan Academy. I would not do reading on there personally. If you're going to work on reading, I would do, like I said, I would go through and get an actual practice test. There are also books that are available on Amazon, for around $20 that you could order the College Board book or the ACT book. But most of that stuff, like most of that information is available for free online. Mm-hmm. So I would always personally like say use the mm-hmm. online resources.
Okay.
Yeah, well, but get down your grammar rules, and hopefully we'll have some time where we could go through those later. But you need to know the semicolon, which is the same thing as a period. Okay, semicolon is the same as a period, and then the colon, which you learn in school for listing, is not just listing. It is way more than that. It's for any form of like description. Okay, so those are important for that English section or the writing and language section. Like those are the two things, and you got to know your apostrophe rules.
So while Lauren is giving you all good strategies on the SAT, she's also giving me some good writing strategies for myself.
One of the things, like when I work with my students that, right now especially, it's like, even if you don't get to take the SAT, at least we're going through some grammar that actually may help you in the future when you're actually, writing, or in college when you're working on your papers and stuff. The grammar is definitely something that can like help in life. And the math too. Sometimes the math is helpful for school, also like they coincide. So, but yes, I'm a big proponent of like the basic grammar rules for sure, because they show up over and over. Especially that punctuation stuff. Oh, one tip on the grammar, keep it simple, short and sweet. Okay, like sometimes in our essays we like try to make it sound fancier and put in extra words. SAT and ACT do not do that. They just simple, right? They are not repetitive. Definitely something to keep a lookout for.
Well, Lauren, thank you so much. This was very informative today. And again, we're going to stay after to answer some questions more in depth. Perhaps maybe in the very near future, we might have like a 2.0 version where we'll go into actual like scenarios and questions and so forth. So again, thank you all for joining. Please stay in for the conversation. And Lauren, thanks so much for giving us your time today and sharing your tips and strategies to our students.
Yes, absolutely. You guys definitely, they can contact me. Please contact me as well if you have specific questions. I mean, I'm happy to help in any sort of way. This is just like obviously the very basics of the test and some quick strategies, but I would love to go into in more depth. So
perfect. Well, I see that we have some questions in the chat box. So at this point, we'll try to answer some of those. So thank you. So I don't know, like Lauren, and for the students, if you guys have any specific questions, this is your time to ask. But I don't know if Lauren, maybe you can walk them through maybe one example. or something like that. I can bring up the handbook if that's okay with you.
One example of like a particular question?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can do absolutely.
And did you want me to share the handbook that we'll be sharing with the students?
You can now, yes, sure. The handbook that Denise is referring to has grammar rules in it. So you can, I would advise you obviously to read through the grammar section. It talks about apostrophes, talks a little bit about who and whom. It does talk about the kind of keeping it concise, as I mentioned. And then it does have the math formulas in it that you need to know. And it has all the kind of essential math concepts. Also, there are the math formulas. That bottom one's a good one, the equation of a circle. That's how we graph circles in the XY coordinate plane. It's something that maybe some people know pretty well, but sometimes it's only kind of touched on in Algebra 2, so definitely an important thing to review. And then there are English tricks. Part 1 is the tricks. There's the short and sweet. I also like to say, when in doubt, leave the comma out.
That's a good way to think about it.
We tend as a society to be excessive commas. Like we think every time we pause, we need to put a comma, but as far as the actual rules go, that's not how it is. So I always say, when in doubt, leave the comma out.
That's probably
the ACT essay, should we be focused on arguing for only one side, or should we be acknowledging the other side in our essay and give the essay more whole feeling? That's a great question. What I would do is I would argue one side for the ACT essay, and I would acknowledge the counter argument and then say why it's wrong. So acknowledge that, okay, if I'm talking about adults should play with kids' toys because it's like a better connection to kids and it helps you feel young and it's good for your brain, acknowledge the other argument that it's like, oh, it's childish, and then say why that's incorrect. So you're still bringing up the other side, but still saying that it is wrong and that your point is correct. So making sure you have a strong kind of point yourself.
So there's a question in there, like, where can we find this? So this handbook, just as a reminder, it will be shared with you all via email. So obviously you all registered to attend this session. But again, this is like the perfect time. Yeah, to ask any questions of Lauren, because she is definitely an expert when it comes to like any specific examples that you might have. I don't know, Lauren, if you can think of any of the top of your head, or I could try looking at maybe a sample test.
Christopher has a question. I have a bunch of sample tests. I can always pull up a couple math questions or show you guys something. Christopher, do you have?
Yeah, go for it, Christopher. You can unmute.
Yeah, so you know how in like colleges how like they look through your resume and all that stuff? Is it better like if they see that you have a test? So like do they push you forward, like more ahead of it?
Like, are you talking about like when you're filling out your college application?
Yeah, and they see that you've took the test and you have your score and everything.
Like, well, I think that really depends. And I'll take this one on, Lauren, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
You know, we help a lot of students with their college application process, and I mean, if you're one of the, you know, students that decides that they want to take the test and you see like, oh, you know what, I have a really good test score. Again, if that's something that you decide, you know, yourself, maybe with, you know, with the guidance of your counselor, or even, you know, discussion you have with your family, like I should submit my scores, then go for it. But given that for the class of 2021, there is a lot of flexibility, tests for many colleges or standardized testing will be test optional. Now, going back to your question about like, well, what about my resume? What about my activities? Admission officers tend to look at most things. Like they look at your transcript, like they're going to be looking at your GPA, they're going to be looking at grades. If an essay is required in the application, they're going to definitely look at your essay, what you're involved in. So they're definitely going to be looking at everything. Grades are definitely important. And I will probably put that out there that, you know, grades are probably going to be, you know, looked at as always and during this application season, given that so many students are not going to be submitting test scores. So just kind of have that in mind. Hopefully that kind of answered your question, Christopher.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it.
No problem. Zaid has a question. Could I?
Yes.
Yes, you can.
Sure.
So I'll actually be sharing Lauren's email towards the very end. So Lauren, did you want to maybe do a sample question with the group? I think you have time for one or two.
Can you guys see it?
So I'll kind of.
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, you can see it. Okay, guys, read it.
Read it. Work it through for a minute.
In the equation above, A, B, and C are constants.
Our favorite.
If the equation is true for all values of x, what is the value of A plus B plus C? Is it A, 6, B, 5, C, 4, and I think D is 3?
D is 3.
Okay.
And obviously, you need that equation above, but hopefully everybody can see. This is old school paper right here.
Remember those days, guys?
No internet. Remember those days when we did things on paper in person?
Yeah.
This is number 24, also on the out of 30. So it is considered a harder question. But it's got that constants word in there, which is why I wanted to do it.
So is that question on one of the sample tests from College
Yeah,
Board?
this is actually, so I have a bunch of old tests, and on the College Board website, they actually have a bunch of old tests posted as well, 8 actual tests, and we're gonna put that link. But this is from a test from May of 2018.
Oh, okay. Do you know what practice test that is? I don't know if
I don't believe it's on the College Board.
Okay.
This is one that I've pulled off of the fantastic Reddit, which if you guys do want to do some Googling on Reddit, if you type in Reddit SAT or ACT practice test, there are, I think ACT, there are around 40, and SAT probably closer to 15 or 20, 8 of which are on the College Board's website, but there are links to PDFs on Reddit for almost, you know, all of the past SATs and ACTs that have been given, which is amazing. So it's a nice resource.
So Lauren, I think the group is curious. Is the answer A, 6?
Yes, I believe that it is. When you distribute and clean up the equation, you should get x squared plus x plus 2x plus 2, which we then combine together, right? So that would be x squared plus 3x plus 2. And then it's in the form that they're asking it to be in, right? So it looks like it's more confusing than it actually is, but you're just distributing, cleaning up the left side of that equation so that it is basically identical to the right side of the equation, and then just extracting A, B, and C and adding them together. So A would just be 1, and then B would be what? 3, and then C is 2. So 1 plus 3 plus 2 is 6. Yes, nice. Hope that explanation made sense. But that's one of those constants questions that looks kind of scary, but all you really need to do is clean up the algebra, do the algebra on the left side of the equation, make it look like the right side of the equation, and then you're essentially done.
Lauren, I'm not sure if it's feasible because you might be using your camera on your laptop or computer, but yes, Saeed was asking, is there a way maybe you can show yourself doing the work?
Yes, absolutely. I'll just do it.
Is there a way where you can point your camera? I don't know if you can point your camera as you're working on it, perhaps.
Oh, Denise, I don't know.
Zaid, we're cracking up over here. I'm making it a little hardcore.
Now you're really putting my technological prowess to. So I'm just gonna write it out and then I will show it to you. Oh my goodness, x squared plus x plus 2x plus 2. So I essentially just, there we go. Can you guys see? Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, we
so
can
I
see.
just cleaned up this side of the equation, distributed the x, so it's x squared plus x, and then distributed the 2, so plus 2x plus 2. And now I'm going to clean it up further, so it would be x squared plus 3x plus 2 equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So essentially, I just made the left side of that equation look like the right side of the equation. And so the a would just be whatever's in front of x squared, which there's nothing in front of it, so it's just a 1. And
And
then
adds up to 6.
the b would be 3, and the c would be 2. And when you take 1 plus 3 plus 2, you get 6.
All right. Thank you, Lauren.
So, yes, absolutely, with my pen and paper here. It's just one of those questions. Why I wanted to do it is because it's a good example. It's number 24 out of 30. So it's considered a hard question. But as far as the algebra goes, this is something you guys may have learned in like 7th or 8th grade. I mean, it's distributing and then combining like terms. It's just the SAT tries to make it look as confusing as possible, because obviously you can't solve for friggin' 4 variables. Like you've got a and b and c and x. You cannot. There's no way to solve for 4 variables with one equation. So you're just matching equations. If you get a question that says it has infinite solutions, you're doing the same thing. Both sides need to be the same if we're talking about infinite solutions.
Thank you, Lauren.
I do have one question for you guys. Well, yes, exactly. It looks hard, but it is not as confusing, right? And that is the deal with SAT math, and something to really keep in mind as you're doing problems, and as you're doing practice problems. Do you guys remember the equation APERT? Does that sound familiar? A equals P and then like R to the T. It's the exponential growth equation.
Is that in the handbook, so I can maybe highlight it?
It's not in the handbook, which is why I wanted to go over it. The SAT does like that equation. I will write it. That's this guy. It was in Algebra 2.
That was such a long time ago for me, Lauren. Christopher says, oh, yes.
Oh, yes. Okay, good. Hopefully some of the rest of you will at least recall this equation. This is the exponential growth and decay equation. It didn't used to show up much on the SAT, but lately it has been on here quite a bit. So the P is the principal. That's what you start with. That's essentially the number. Nice. That's essentially the number that you start with. The rate is the rate of increase or decrease, and then T is the time. We use it in physics as well. Nice. Yeah, it's one of those things, you know, sometimes they don't do a lot of stuff, and then they'll start adding stuff to the test, and it's definitely one of the things they've added in the last year or so. So I would expect to see it on there. The one thing I will tell you is if it's a percent and you're doing a percent, then the increase, it would be 1 plus the rate to the time, because anytime you're doing a percent increase, it's always 1 plus whatever the percent is. So for instance, if it was like a 20% increase, it'd be 1.2 in those parentheses. Yes, that is the interest formula, exactly. In school, you guys also learned it with an E, which is logs, but the SAT does not do E, so it will not be on there with an E. It'll just be like, you know, it'll be on there like this. So definitely add that to your formula page and add it to your mind. The other thing that's not in the handbook, Denise, is the quadratic formula, which will also be on there. And you guys should know it, but you know, negative b plus or minus square root of b squared and square is all over 2a. You can obviously look it up on the internet. It's all over the place. It's probably in your math notes, but you do need to know it. So there. Any other questions?
These are some great questions. Just really quickly, I thought I'd share the quadratic formula for any students.
Oh, thank you, Denise.
That might not have it in hand. But make sure you guys are writing this in your notes. Again, the recording will be shared with you guys. Of course, it was a lot of information, but it was a lot of good information, and you guys have some amazing questions. I'm actually going to be sharing Lauren's email just now for any student that might be interested in emailing her. But yeah, that concludes our session for today. If you found this helpful, would love to hear some thoughts from you. You guys can private message me. If it's something that you would want, maybe like a 2.0 version, where maybe we can dig a little deeper, please let us know. Maybe we can have another one in September. But yeah, feel free to private message me, or you can just let me know in the group chat. If you have any specific questions, Lauren, do you have maybe like just 5 minutes to stay behind in case a student has an individual question?
Yes, definitely. I allotted, you know, quite a bit of time so that I could make sure to answer anyone's questions.
Okay.
Yeah.